meeting from it right now, friend. Come on. All right. I think 1 minute. Natalie's here too. At least I saw her on the list, which is good. This is IETF 111 and the Sidrops meeting at IETF 111. We're virtually in San Francisco and virtually in your house. I'm Chris. There's Kayor as well, who's going to present some draft status for us. And Natalie is in the list as well. So first step. Note well. Everyone knows where to find this and read it. I will read it to you. We have, before we do agenda stuff, we have a Jabber scribe, I think, already, because that happens in the chat here. And we have blue sheets because the blue sheets happen automatically. I think we just need somebody to take notes. Aha, Natalie says, yes. On the code IMT, how do you pronounce that? Anyway, if there's somebody who can take notes there, that would be terrific. I can't because I have to drive. At least part of it. Anybody? You just type into the chat. I'll do it. That'll be great. Still waiting for somebody to agree to take notes.
Yeah, okay.
George will take notes. Was that yes, George?
Deny it. It was not yes.
You're killing me. Okay, well, that's confusing, meaning he's going to take notes. Let's assume he's going to take notes. That way he'll have to take notes. It can be brief also, George. Not super brief. Okay, that's the agenda. Tom, Yob, Hybo, me and Yob, and then me, and mine will be super short. It's not gonna be 10 minutes. Oh, it's not page down, it's, nope, that. Okay, Kair, I think maybe you could even drive this.
I don't know how best to drive it. I'll let you drive it. But good afternoon, folks from California. The draft statuses are posted up here. We are going to be somewhat busy in next 3 months. Here are the list of standard stack drafts. You have signed TEL in IESG for RSC. We are waiting for an implementation report from Joe, and we will send emails out on the working group list asking for the implementation reports. You have no identity draft that is getting ready for working group call. Bunch of drafts are getting ready for working group calls. This is one of them. You have ASPA drafts that post revision would like to issue a working group call. So we know there are a couple of implementations for that solution. The RRDP and 6486 biz is going to be kept on hold still till we have a little more discussion and we iron out the solution part inside the drafts, and then we will solicit the working group for the last call. So that would be in the next phase. Next slide, please. Yep, and the last one, but not the least on the standards track, 8210 biz is also in the working group last call pending. So that would be the one as well that we will be processing. A bunch of drafts on the informational track, you have ROV timing. That's pending a working group last call, which we will issue as well. The ROA considerations is going to be on the hold, and the LTA use case is already in IESG. Next slide, please. Both these drafts are on hold. One of them is best current practices draft, RPKI max length, and the experimental RPKI RTA. Both of them are on hold. We'll have some more. Sorry about that. We'll have some more conversation. Hoping to have more conversations on the list before we progress these drafts. Any questions?
I have a question. Can you go back to file? I understand a Signtel update is forthcoming in the next few minutes, but given that the status here indicates pending IESG, whereas the working group last call appears to have taken place in July 2020, almost a year ago, and knowing that a great deal of effort has been put in by Tom Harrison and team to produce a testbed, I would like to suggest that for Signtel, especially given the impact the technology could have on the ecosystem, it would be good to also hold for implementation reports.
Yep, fair enough. It was in IESG, if I recall it correctly. We've gotten it back also from IESG. We have had few comments on that. Chris, am I right on that? So we will wait for the implementation, or we'll ask for the implementation report as well. Chris?
I believe that's correct. I was going to go check my mail while chatting. Is that the only question, Yob?
Yep.
Warren.
Yeah, I had a related question. I don't think I've seen Signtel being sent to me, so I wasn't quite sure what was meant by pending IESG. It looks like it's okay. It looks like it's still in the working group, listed as in working group last call.
I think what it means is I see a reply in my mail saying we closed the last call, which I assume that we sent it on to IESG, but we didn't. So that's okay. We can take care of it after we talk about Yob's implementation report problems. I think, anyway. Any more questions, or do we move on to Signtel from Tom Harrison? I should say, Tom, do you want to do this yourself, or do you want me to be the clicky person?
I'll go doing it myself. Thanks. Okay, you can see that.
That's working, yes.
Okay, good. Thanks. Okay, thanks. So this document has been presented. Has been presented a few times. It's about a trust anchor having a way to signal to relying parties that the trust anchor key has changed, or the certificate URLs for the existing key have changed. And the way this is done is by this new signed object called a trust anchor key, or TAC object. So the main aim here is simplifying key rollover, getting more confidence in the process. Today, if we wanted to roll our key, we'd have to get a new towel, push it to all the client vendors, probably post to NOG lists, things like that, and then wait for people to update or upgrade. Client upgrade may not necessarily pull in new tells. Clients may not be aware of needing a process for this because the tells don't change very much. So we're likely looking at a long tail of clients who stay on the old tell and update and having to keep both keys maintained for a long time. If we get something like this done and out the door, then all we need is for clients to upgrade to a version that supports it. And then this is much less of a problem because they'll just get the new tell data automatically. A result of that is that we have more confidence around key rollover, so we have less of an issue with HSM vendor lock-in. And a secondary goal is that we would get the ability to update the tell URLs, and that just gives us a bit more flexibility around deployment, switching domains, things like that. So changes since 06. In 06, the TAC object had a set of current keys and a set of revoked keys. In 07, the TAC object has two keys only, the current key and the successor key. The current key is always the TA key under which the TAC was issued, so that doesn't change. And the TAC can only be used to revoke the current key rather than arbitrary other keys. The successor key is not used until the current key is revoked, so it's just advisory before then. And yeah, so those are the changes. And the main use case is still covered, which is just standard key rollover. But these changes mean that basically things are simpler. There are fewer ways in which things can go wrong, stuff like that. Also, there were various ASN1 module fixes from Russ Housley. The previous module had all sorts of problems, so that's in better shape now as well. Walking through the key rollover process to show the differences between 06 and 07. Phase 1 is the initial publication of a TAC object. So this is actually the same in both the documents. The TA publishes a TAC object, and it includes extra URLs past those that are in the current TAL in order to determine the population of clients that can actually process TAC objects successfully. And it can do that by looking at the request logs for ta.so. And that information helps to inform further efforts they might make to move people off one key and onto another. In phase 2, introducing the next TA key. In 06, the first TAC is updated to list the new key as a current key. When the client comes along to start validating, they'll see that new current key and they'll resolve the associated certificate, process the repository for that certificate, and just repeat that process until they have until they've processed all of the available TAC objects. And at that point, they'll have a set of current keys, a set of revoked keys. They subtract the set of revoked keys from the current keys, and they end up with a set of, I suppose, remainder current keys. And then they pick one of those current keys, it doesn't matter which one, for further validation. In 07, the first TAC object is updated to list the second key as a successor. So it's just advisory at this point. When the client comes along to start validating, they have a couple of options. They can just ignore the successor key because the current key hasn't been revoked. Or they can alert the user to say maybe you want to test with this new key, or they could do some sort of basic validation of that new key if they wanted to. But the important thing is that the client must use the current key for the validation results that it reports to the user, in the sense that it can't take the successor key and just rely on that for generating BRP type information. So there are three main outcomes from this. One is that at a given point in time, every client is on the same key. So that makes debug on the server side simpler because we don't have to worry about which key they actually use for validation if they have problems. The second thing is that there's no need for a client to process extra keys in 07. So it's just simpler in that sense. They can simply ignore the successor if the current key hasn't been revoked. And the third thing is that in 06, once that set of current keys has been collected, it actually needs to be stored locally, and each of those keys needs to be gone through when subsequent validation runs happen. Whereas in 07, the client doesn't have to store anything past the current key and its associated URLs. So that just makes things simpler implementation-wise. Phase 3 is about revoking the previous TA key. In 06, the TA updates both of the TAC objects to list the first key as revoked. The client comes along to start validating, gets that set of current keys, which contains 2 keys, gets the revoked keys, contains 1 key, ends up with 1 current key left over, being the second key, and then uses that for validation. In 07, the TA updates the first TAC object, marking the current key as revoked, but otherwise the outcome is the same. The client comes along, sees that the first one's revoked, moves to the second one. The main difference here is that there's no need for both TAC objects to revoke, so there's no chance of them getting out of sync or similar. And the last step, which might happen sometime after phase 3, is to update the first key to be long-lived, so it serves as a permanent pointer for clients starting with ta.tel, the original ta.tel, to get to the second key. So the TA removes any CA certificates from that first repository, and then publishes everything with a long validity / expiry dates. We have testbed stuff, so a client that can be used to update a TAL, and various test TALs that can be used for testing the different scenarios that come up. This is pretty much the same as from the last time this was presented, except that it's been updated to support the new structure. And yeah, we'd really appreciate it if anybody could try this stuff out, let us know how it goes. So next steps, I'd thought possibly working group last call would be the next step, but per Yo's comments, this could go with an implementation report. Obviously more implementations and so on would be useful. So yeah, any feedback on that, extra feedback on that would be good. Thanks.
Tom, there's a question in chat. If you want to read it. Yeah, apparently Martin has no audio, so, or I could read your call.
Yeah, okay, so the question the question is what an RP is supposed to do, or okay, basically what can an RP do with a successor key? The RP could for example, like if it wanted to build up trust in that key, it could carry out like 2 validation runs and then compare the results. So that's a way it could build trust, in the sense that it gets those results, compares them, and then reports to the user, hey, the second key actually looks fine. If we switch to the second key, that wouldn't be a problem. But it's important that for actual results for VRPs that might push out over router protocol, stuff like that it keeps using the current key. So there's nothing stopping the RP from doing checks of the second key and comparisons and reporting them in a sort of advisory capacity. But what it can't do is just take the second key and use it for the results it produces for things hanging off router protocol and stuff like that. So hopefully that helps.
Job?
I have 2 comments. One is with my hat as RPKI client implementer. The architecture of RPKI client does not permit the object parsing process to write out TAL files. That is considered a privileged operation. So in terms of implementation, I think I could get as far as honoring the revocation part, but building an arc to the next PKI tree is probably not possible and would still need to be done the old-fashioned way via operating system updates or a new package with tau keys. So this is not to discourage anybody from signed tau, but I think it's good to recognize that some RPs have a restrictive access pattern that does not permit updating taus. And then my second question was the profile. Does a tag object need to be signed by the root certificate or any certificate that is, or any CA that is subordinate to the root? I'm not sure if the document clarifies the constraints, such as like the word a tag object, I think, should only be signed by a self-signed CA. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, that's right. Well, signed by an EA certificate issued by the TA. Yeah.
It might be worth clarifying that point.
Yes, sir.
Randy.
Randy Bush, IJ and Arcus. Do you have, you've got phases that depend upon software upgrades in the field. Do we have any actual measurements of upgrade rates and percentages on which we can base estimates of what can occur?
No, we don't have that data, but we can look at collecting it. We've got fairly good look, at least for RIDP, because we get reasonable client information out of the user agent. But yeah, that's something we can look at doing.
Thanks.
Ben.
Hi there. So I haven't read the most recent iteration, so apologies if this is already dealt with in the draft. But if the revocation status is only held in your example in TAC 1, then the private key material for the old TA still needs to be treated as highly sensitive, because otherwise TA 1 could essentially unrevoke itself after the fact, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So if that's the case, doesn't that rather defeat the purpose of a key role?
The idea is that when a TA gets to phase 4, that it deletes the key. So it issues
that presupposes that a bad actor doesn't have it in their pocket for a rainy day, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, I think that might be it's hopefully a sufficiently unlikely case, but I think it's probably a corner case that this protocol should deal with, personally.
Yeah, okay, we can look at doing something about that.
Okay. Be good if Ben, if you put that into the mailing list so we can keep track of it. Jeff.
If a key revokes itself, then an attacker doesn't need to worry about much else. It simply revokes the current key and walks away, and everything is dead. There's no way out of that. It does seem that if you want to roll these trust keys, which is the implicit assumption going on here, that there is some operational reason to avoid compromise, so you want to regularly roll to somehow mitigate that threat, then this process seems awfully vulnerable to points during the roll where the key is compromised and the roll now becomes a problem. And, you know, it's that earlier conversation thread in chat about, I have to trust the old key right up until the point it's revoked. There's no way of phasing in the new key. It's a complete, you know, A-B switch. But similarly, you're allowing a key to kill itself. and what actually happens when a key revokes itself without a successor. Do you have to then contact every single relying party to somehow bootstrap up a new TAL because you've lost any form of continuity? And so you're replacing one vulnerability, key compromise, with the second one, which is fragility in role. And I would have thought at the very least the security considerations of this draft, which simply goes, no, HSMs are great, might actually have a more detailed discussion as to exactly what the risks are when you introduce the concept of self-revocation and what it means in points of fragility in this rolling process. Because I think you're leaving an awful lot in this draft for the reader to guess. And I didn't think that was the aim of this kind of process, where you're not only trying to describe a process, but to justify why the process has some superior property in terms of robustness. I just don't think it's ready yet to actually, describe what I would regard as a robust rolling process that pays due attention to the points of vulnerability that this process actually also adds. Thank you.
Just on the part about if the current key is revoked without a successor, there's some text in the document that addresses that. And basically, if a client gets to that point, then it simply aborts the validation run and tries again later. Because it's always going to be an error for a TA to revoke the current key without a successor being listed. So yeah, it's really up to the TA at that point to fix things by unrevoking, for example, or by adding a successor.
It revokes itself, either that the key's been compromised, why should I trust it? Or B, the TA is managing to make operational stuff-ups of a truly awesome magnitude, why should I trust it? And to simply say, oh, it's okay, you should trust it, as you do in that last paragraph of Section 8, strikes me as a bit of a leap of faith, which is kind of heading beyond what rational trust would lead you to.
Okay.
Okay. It would be good if some of that ended up, Jeff. Oh, there's Martin. Sorry. Martin?
Yes, I think I made audio work. Can you confirm that?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is Maarten Aartsen. So I just wanted to say that Ben stated the point or the question I was trying to state earlier in a much more succinct way. So I would, it would be good to either include in the security conservation section that it's not necessary to signal trust in a successor key because, for example, the mechanism is needed to be kept simple, or so then it's explicit that that's not a part that the protocol should offer, or it would be good to have some way to signal trust in a successor, which would help mitigate the scenario where an attacker compromises a trust anchor, and then there's no way to signal that a successor published after that time is actually controlled by the operator, the TA operator. Whereas if you have a way to, for example, co-sign a successor key prior to compromise, then you can later see that the one which is published might not have the trust status you were expecting. But yeah, I think yeah, that was more or less what I was trying to say.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay. As I was saying, I think some of the commentary should end up on the list here, of course, so we can keep track of the conversation and work it through the comments for the doc. Other than that, seeing no other people at the queue, thank you very much, Tom. And Job, I think You can drive your own slides if you want.
I am happy to try. Ask to share slides.
Hold on. All right. You should be. Oh, sorry. I thought I clicked the button. Very confusing interface. Back to mute.
Wow, it works. This is so much easier than the screen sharing. Okay. My name is Joop Snijders from Fastly, as volunteer for the OpenBSD project. And I want to share with you today an update on RPKI signed checklist, or RSC, as of July 2021. What is an RSC? RPKI signed checklist, it borrows heavy from the RTA concept, and it is an ability to construct a signature over an arbitrary digital object. An arbitrary digital object means, in this context, that any file or thing we can generate a SHA-256 hash for, that hash can be signed with signatures that can be validated against the RPKI up to a trust anchor. An interesting aspect of RSC is that it exists outside the RPKI publication servers and outside the realm of routing. So this is a technology that should not have impact on BGP operations or the stability of the internet, because these signed objects are not distributed through the same mechanism as through which we distribute manifests and CRLs and ROAS and Ghostbuster records. I'll give you an update on the testing we've conducted so far and the status of running code, and then I will conclude with a question to the group on what should be done next. So since the last Sidrops meeting, IANA has been so kind to grant an early allocation. IANA early allocations are a mechanism to promote interoperability. Usually, for a lot of code points, first the RFC needs to be published, and then you get the code point. But in an early allocation procedure, the idea is that way ahead of the actual RFC publication, the code point is already set, so that organizations don't need to resort to temporary code points. This also means that the on-the-wire format is now kind of fixed. Changes are possible, but we would really, as a working group, need to have consensus that more changes are warranted. The content type OID has been added to both OpenSSL and LibreSSL. So this means that in the future, when these versions make it to your desktop or server environments, you'll have a little bit of an easier time debugging RSC files with standard tooling. How we've approached the testing and vetting of the format. In my Amsterdam office, I had two projects going on. One is I call it a manual signer. So this is not as advanced as the Dragon research implementation or Krill, but basically it's just enough to get an RSC object created and signed for verification by others. And then separately, based on the OpenBSD RPKI client implementation, I've been working in a private development branch to build an ability to decode and validate RSC objects. Then Ben Madison put a lot of awesome work into a tooling system called RPKI Mancer. And RPKI Mancer has as primary goal to verify whether the encoding, the ASN1 encoding of the proposed objects decodes properly and encodes properly. And this ability helped me confirm whether the RPKI client implementation was on the right track or not, but also helped confirm whether Ben Madison's understanding of the ASN1 profile was correct or not. And then the third player in our triangle was Tom Harrison from APNIC. who wrote a signer and validator implementation based on OpenSSL. And again, this is developed entirely independent from my own efforts or Ben's efforts. And it is through this triangle that we ultimately came to a consensus on this object is correct or is not correct. And then as a fourth pillar to this, Russ Housley was generous enough to dedicate some of his time to help confirm whether the ASN specification compiled in his Python-based toolset. And he has helped with numerous versions of the ASN profile to confirm if they fit properly in the wider CMS ecosystem. I think it's a lot of fun to collaborate with people and email each other objects, but not source code to see if the other person can manage to decipher or decode or confirm whether the object is correct. On the APNIC GitHub in the issue tracker, there's a few examples of small quirks that were uncovered and are probably good to look at if you're planning to implement RSC to avoid walking into the same pitfalls. Then a fifth player came into the game, Alberto from the Fourth Validator project. He managed to also construct a proof of concept implementation. And in doing so, he discovered a very important omission from the draft, specifically that we had failed to clarify what you're supposed to do with AS identifiers. And this slide is a demonstration, I think, of how valuable it is to have people that are actually writing the code and reading the draft, having that side by side, and then hearing their feedback on whether a draft is complete or whether there are omissions. So Alberto, thank you very much for this contribution. There is an example RPKI signed checklist. You can find it on github/job/draft-rpki.js checklists. And the screenshot here contains an ASN parse dump of the E content. On the IETF Sidrops track wiki, I started to put together an implementation report where for each normative term that exists in the draft, each implementer clarifies what that normative term meant in context of their coding efforts. So it is possible that one implementation complies with a certain normative term, but that in another implementation, that normative term doesn't mean anything and the result is not applicable. So for instance, a signer will do certain checks, but it will not do the same checks as the validator. And the validator, of course, is not generating signatures. So both aspects of the equation have slightly different normative term sets that apply to them. And the goal of this wiki page, of this table, is to collect an overview of whether each individual normative term is covered by at least 2 implementations, and that those implementations agree with each other and have done some interoperability testing of sorts. So right now this page is empty. My hope is that people will click the URL and fill in what they can fill in, and that it helps document shepherds or the IESG to understand whether all aspects of a draft have been implemented or whether there are latent capabilities in a draft which none of the software is implemented. So I hope that people will take this page as an example for future Sidrops work. This is modeled after how IDR structures the implementation reports, and I hope it's of benefit to others. Then my big ask to the big five. With the big five, I of course mean the regional internet registries and national internet registries. My hope is that each of the major certificate issuers can maybe provide a web portal or an API or both to generate RSC objects. In this slide, I copied two aspects that I remember from the Erin portal. The Erin methodology is either you click things together in a web form and click submit, or that you generate a signature over a specific pipe delimited format. And I think that in the same way that ROA objects are created, RSC objects can be created and presented in a user interface. And of note, if you're going to create a RSC signer, do not forget to also provide the end users with a RSC revocation tool. Because once somebody has emailed an RSC file to someone else, the only way to invalidate that file will be to list the serial on the applicable CRL. So yeah, what's next? I think there's a few options. On the one hand, the document can remain in a holding pattern to collect feedback from more RP and signer implementers, or from the likes of the RERs and NIRs, or we could decide as a working group that there is sufficient evidence that this object profile is feasible and implementable, and move it along to working group last call. Either way, it doesn't really matter for me because the code point has already been assigned, and from a technical perspective, that is the most crucial thing to start using this tool outside the publication system. So I would love to hear about people's plans for RSC, if they have any, and if they do have plans, there is an opportunity to align the timeline of this draft to allow for more feedback to be gathered. And that's my last slide. So with that, I'm going to click towards the chat box and also open the mic line up for questions and comments. I see Chris Morrow is asking, in what CRL is it published? So the RSC file contains the RSC EE certificate, and the CRL distribution point extension indicates where the CRL is that applies to that specific RSC. So the location, the CRL is online, and the location is in the RSC itself.
Thank you. Tom?
And of course, if the CRL cannot be found, it means there is no CRL, which means you cannot verify the RSC, so it would not pass validation. This is the same thinking as what we went through with manifests and ROAS. There must be a CRL, and if it cannot be found, then the signed object is meaningless.
Just for APNIC, at least on the server side, we intend to do this sometime in the first half of next year.
Thank you, Tom. So that means other RERs can raise APNIC and maybe be first. I am happy to help them. Ben.
Ben here. Excuse me. A couple of things. First, a kind of a procedural question. I don't know who's best placed to answer it. In the early allocation, there was a OID assigned for the content type, but not for the module. And whilst that's, I mean, that's fine to a point because that doesn't impact the on-the-wire format, so you can, you know, it doesn't impact interop testing. It does make it does make code kind of unmergeable. So in RPKI Mantra, I've still got a kind of a nasty make file that strips out a TBD and sticks a placeholder in there before it gets compiled. Is there early allocation for the module OID subtree? And if so, what does that process look like? Because it would be nice to do that. I see Russ has just joined the call, the queue. Maybe he's best placed to answer that.
Please, Russ.
So yes, an early allocation for the module ID could be given. Most implementers don't really care about that. I know the tool you're using does. But if there were a request, I'm the IANA expert for that ARC, so I would approve assigning it if asked.
Okay, thanks. And then just quickly on the subject of signer implementations, I've had an indication from the guys at Afrinic that they are keen to also roll an implementation from their side. I don't have timelines, but they indicated that they could get to work on that pretty much immediately. So hopefully by early next year, we've got 2 signer implementations from 2 RIRs.
That is awesome news. I wanted to reply about the early allocation thing. I pulled up the draft. There is actually 4 things we want from IANA. There's the content type, an update to the file name extensions, an update to the RPKI science subregistry, and a media type. From my perspective, the content type is really the key one to keep this project moving forward. But the other 3 aspects can wait till RFC publication. I think some of this also stems from a desire that the IETF does not wish to recycle security-sensitive code points, whereas, for instance, with a file name extension, it is conceivable that a future application might want to get the one we propose. So, just clarifying that a subset of the IANA stuff has not yet been done, and that's expected. Warren.
Thank you. Yeah, Warren, no hats. It seems like it might be useful to present this at something like Sec Dispatch or Sec Area or something before it goes to Working Group Last Call, just so that people aren't too surprised when they see it come along. Like having a presentation explaining why it's useful might be good before people see the document show up on their desk. Just a thought.
Okay. We'll take a look at the schedule and see if that's possible. Thies.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. Do we want any certificates to be able to sign an RSC? Or would we want, for example, a key usage bit that indicates that a certificate is supposed to sign RSCs below it?
That is a great question. I'm not sure the key usage extension can meaningfully be used in this context for two reasons. As far as I'm aware, in the Go language, or Go library, the key usage extension has sort of been rendered mostly inoperable. So I'm not sure how the ecosystem is able to support proper verification of key usage. I do know that some of the RPs do verify key usage, and that's a good thing, but it's not a given, it seems. And I'm not sure how we would restrict this without making RSC quite difficult to use. I think that the same CA that has the resources as subordinate and can produce ROAS naturally can produce other objects like RSC. But if you have a very specific suggestion, we can take a look at it.
Okay, thanks.
response. The X509 profile for resource certificates is pretty specific in terms of what's allowed and not allowed for key usage. And we worked pretty hard to conform to that profile as much as we could. The only deviation from it is the missing SIA extension. And so I'd be kind of loath to go back on that. And I think that the content of the blobs that you construct a signature over and put in an RSC are intentionally not in scope. They could be absolutely anything. And I think it's even conceivable that a TA at the root might want to construct a signature over something if they want to, for example, start emailing verifiable copies of the CPS around or something like that. I don't, unless there's a specific attack vector that you've got in mind, I don't see the utility in restricting that.
Back to Thies.
Crazy right now. But yeah, it just came up in my mind that you may not want to sign these objects under some part of your CA hierarchy. But I also see your side of this. It's probably better to discuss this on list.
Yeah, and now is a good time to talk about such things because it's not too late to hammer out the details. Instead of using the key usage extension or even a policy extension, another blunter approach could be to simply state that a TA cannot sign an RSC, and then the RSC validator would simply check if the authority is a self-signed certificate or not, and if it is, rejected. But that's, I guess it would be good to have a vision on what it is we would want to prevent from happening under certain circumstances, and then look how we can implement this either as through natural language with normative terms, or maybe as part of the X509 framework. But yeah, thank you for raising this.
Okay, seeing nobody else in the queue, why don't we thank Job for presenting and move on to Hybo, who can either present his slides himself, or I can be the click person. Speak up, let me know. Oh, excellent, you'd like to share. There we go.
Hello. Is it okay now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is hello. This time I'm Hybo Wang. Now let me introduce our solution. The solution is about the verification using the rules based on the region authorization. This is a scenario that perhaps may happen. That is road hijacking. Suppose there are two providers such as SP1 and SP2. They all large providers. They may also have multiple AS. So, but such the AS 6501. This is a backbone AS, and also he may have some metro AS such as AS 6502, 6503, like this. The SP2 is almost the same. The server now is connected at the AS 65105, but there is the user connected at the AS 6502. The user want to access the server 10.1.1.1. The route will send to ISP1, but if there is a ISP3 such as 65500, it was it was all the ISP1 and ISP2 the provider. If he forked a specified route like 610.1.1.1 and with mask 24, the route at the AS 65001 see the route will all correct because the orange AS is correct and the AS path is also correct, even though we use the ASPA to do the verification. So the host route access the dev server will be hijacked to the AS 65500. This is our scenario. Because now in this scenario also we may have some existing method such as the option 1 use ROV. But ROV for ROV, if we the hijack fork the routes with the right orange AS, such the ROV will not work correctly. And also we also have another some other job like the max length for the ROV, but the max length can define the more specific route hijacking, but it may cause more complex for traffic adjusting, because sometimes the ISP want to adjust their traffic by split the route to a more specific route. So some ISP want to register the ROA use a range of masks, not want to use a very specific route. And also another method is use ASPA. ASPA also can defend some scenario, but in this scenario it will not work correctly because the ISP3 the relation for ISP3 to ISP2 and the relation to ISP3 to ISP1 is all correct. So here it will not work correctly. This is our proposal. We want to use a region-based route replication. Here there are some concepts. The first one is region. Region means consists of ASAs for one ISP. The next is RC, means the region configuration. Configuration means that consists of several regions, which each region must be connected to all other regions in the region configuration through BGP. And we want to do that the router within the same region are trustworthy, because for one ISP, we must trust their own routes from in the region. And also some ISPs will join to one region configuration, we also thinks it as it was trustworthy. In this solution, we can protect routes and the orange with same region or the same region configuration will not be hijacked by other non-trusted region or region configuration routers. And here we want to use we based on the firstly we must based on the RV because RV will provide the mapping for routes and orange AS. And also then we also want a new mapping like the routes with orange regions. And the validation rules is also very simple. So first, we will reject all the routes if the route is originated within the local region, but it are received from external region or EBGP peers. So we will treat these routes as invalid. And another, if the routes are originated within local region configuration, not a local region, but a local region configuration, but also the routes are received from external region configuration peer, they will also treat it as invalid. This is this is the region-based verification steps. Firstly, we will register our region and the region configuration, and the region may be like this, such as region configuration number, region ID, and the ASN. Then the router may be downloaded the region-based profile from API IP server. Then we will use the region-based profile to decide the EBP roles. If we may use the BBP peer roles AS to correlate with the region-based profile. Then we can decide which is the peer's role, is the local region or local region configuration or other than this. And then the router will firstly execute the ROV. If the prefix ROV returns valid, means the roles only AS is okay. But we will then we will just do the region-based verification. Decide on the PRAS. So then we will use if we adjust if the route is originated with local region, but the peer is not belong to local region, then reject. And if the route is originated with local region configuration, but the peer is not belong to local region configuration, then reject. This is the deciding process. Here are some application scenario. The first one is hijack protect for roles originated with local region. Here are two regions. The SP1 with region 1, he will own some AS 6501 to 65003, and SP will set to region 2. He will own some AS 65104 to 65106, and the SP1 and 2 they will join to a region configuration 1. Then the SP1 is AS 6501. He will decide once he receive roles from SP3's AS 65500. He will decide that the peer to AS 65500 are not with the local region because the AS is not belong to region 1 and also not belong to region configuration 1. Then the roles received from it is valid for RV because the origin AS is okay for the dead server 10.2.1.1. But it should be originated from local region because this role's origin AS is belong to the region 1. But now the peer is not to region 1, so we will reject the roles received from 65500 because the peer is out of region 1. This is another scenario, the scenario 2. This will do hijack protect for roles originated with local region configuration, but not local region. Here the server is accessed at the ISP2, the AS105. ISP1, because this here ISP1, the region-based profile will have his region info and the region configuration. ISP2 also have this info. Now the AS6501 decides the peer. The peer is for AS65500 will not to belong to local region and also not belong to region configuration 1. The roles received from 6550 is valid, also is valid because only AS is okay. But the roles we want the route is originated from, and the route is originated from region configuration 1 and region 2. But now the peer is not belong to region 1 and region 2 and also not belong to region configuration 1. So we may reject these roles because the role may be hijacked. Okay, then this is a new draft we just submitted as a working group. Now this we want to some more comments about this, and also this this solution we also have showed at the last EPNIC at EPNIC. So you also may see something about the last EPNIC's introduced. Thank you. Hi, Randy.
So you have an assumption that in my region, no routers are compromised. So if the same is true of all my neighbors, then nobody on the internet can be compromised. This is brilliant.
Okay, thank you.
Ben?
Hi, Heiber.
Hi.
So there are a lot of different problems that I can see with this approach, but I'll pick the two most problematic that I can see. The first one is the one that Randy just called out. There is no operator on the face of the earth that I trust enough to take it as one of my founding assumptions that they can't make a configuration error, which really breaks the most fundamental part of these assumptions. And so I think it's unworkable from that perspective. I think there's going to be very, very few operators that would be willing to establish one of these region configuration things and kind of and work on the assumption that everyone is entirely trustworthy within that. The second is that it makes the internet topology as a whole extremely fragile, because the rejection rules that you enumerated, and maybe they're a simplification for the purposes of the slides, but the rejection rules that you enumerated, in the topology that you've got up on the screen at the moment, that would cause any routes that are validly transiting ISP2 to ISP3 to ISP1 to be rejected as well. So if the peering between ISP1 and ISP2 breaks, that traffic has nowhere to go. It makes everything remarkably fragile. And given that you said that there were ASPA objects in the system that confirmed that AS65500 is a legitimate transit provider to both networks, that seems to be a lot of fragility for a very, very corner case attack vector. I don't think that this is an approach worth pursuing personally.
At first, in fact, the solution also we don't show here, but in the draft we also show the solution also can be used like use the traditional route policy. And in fact, some vendors, some providers also SOSP also have deployed some route policy like this. But our solution is to set it more easier to deploy for this, because if we use the route policy, we also we must set one by one to specify how to filter the routes. So I don't think it's not useful, because some vendor had deployed, in fact deployed like this. And also I'm not catch all your questions, so I think also we may take it to the list about the detailed question. Okay.
Rudiger?
Works. You set out with a problem scenario where you say, well, okay, the root propagation between certain ASs is not being secured because it is trusted. And then you create a fairly complex scheme of data and checks for securing the whole thing. Kind of not questioning exactly what checks are done and what checks would be reasonable to be done at the various places, I think is very much missing. I have trouble to believe that you really assume that within one of the ISPs their 24 ASs are fully interconnected without any checks, and that's reasonable. That's a reasonable policy. Well, so kind of to some extent, as usual, Randy kind of raised the question in the most succinct way possible. But I certainly would be asking, well, okay, please explain exactly what checks and guarantees you are dropping or assuming within your starting scenario. If that cannot be done in a simple way, any solution addressing that complex scenario does not make a lot of sense.
I'm sorry, I not catch all your question. So we may take it to list to discuss about this.
Yep.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing this presentation. It appears to me that you and the group are dealing with ISPs that are perhaps substantially larger than what people might be used to in, say, Europe or North America. So large that confederations do not appear to cut it, but something else is needed. And I feel like your proposal is hinting towards a mechanism to aggregate groups of public ASNs into a single entity of sorts. So it might also be worth considering to ask for feedback from IDR, whether the proposed path is the most efficient path or whether in the BGP protocol and thus in the next iteration in the RPKI profiles, what you're after can be achieved. I would also encourage you to see if you can specify in ASN1 how exactly you envision the objects to exist. And I think this will help facilitate the discussion, because then we can compare our spoken English with something the computer can interpret. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, our because our ISP is something not like it in Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No one else in the queue.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Haibo, for the presentation. And
okay, thank you all.
Yep. And we'll move on to the next thing, which I'll try and present. Good thing I have this in here twice. Share. Okay, this is a presentation which I'm sure we'll get some enjoyable comments. I'm going to do part of it, and then Job has some specific examples to talk about. But the conversation about running code for Sidrops has come up on the Sidrops mailing list at least one time. I think there are a number of cases in the real world where Cider and Sidrops in particular here, could have benefited from some implementation reports and running code before we ran off and tried to deploy something and decided later, like, oops, maybe we could have done this better or differently, or I'm not trying to be pejorative here. Oh, I should do this too, I'm sorry. So at the end of the day, I think the proposal got enough kind of okays through the mailing list that running code would be helpful for us. I think we should probably do that as a group. I think there are a couple of examples of why. Yeah, okay. Oh, thanks. You'll put in a whole bunch of people. So all of the discussions about the manifest changes and handling that went into 6486 biz, I think are great things that would have benefited from this. How we hit the whole long discussion about CRLs, which is also part of that same conversation. There's a current ongoing topic about changing our validation algorithm and either using a reserved or what we already reserved code point, or just bypassing that to avoid waiting for upgrades at the client side or the RP side. There's a bunch of ASPA work in the queue now, and RTA and RSC, all of which, will all of the implementers of RPKI code be able to talk to each other appropriately? Would be good to know that before we deployed and realized we have to do parts of this again. It'll help us optimize things and find out where we made some assumptions that we probably didn't have to make, or we should have decided a different way. I think this is a pretty typical reasoning, so I don't see a lot of reason to belabor it anymore. Randy, go ahead.
I would note that there was interoperable running code for a good half the things you mentioned. What there wasn't interoperable running code for was some of the newer inventions that I won't characterize. This is not a routing working group. I'm not saying there doesn't need to be one, but this is supposedly an ops working group and shouldn't be developing protocol by the basic rules of the game.
I guess I don't necessarily disagree there. I would go back to the very beginning of your conversation or your comment and say, I agree we did have some implementation interoperability and testing long ago. We, as a group, kind of fell down on that for, I don't know, reasons. Not super important right now what those reasons are. But I think the fact that we were able to build something even a while back and get it out the door because of the implementation testing, I think made a lot of that at least go. And without that, we end up building things or using things or realizing things as deployed aren't working as we expect or as optimally as we expect. And I think the interoperability testing, would be a benefit here. I agree we're not a routing group, we're not a protocol group. Our ADs decided how that was going to work for.
We have an ops AD and a routing AD in the room. I'd be interested to hear their comments.
Why don't we have Ruger go and then Warren, and then we'll get back on the slides.
I usually hate to see that the emphasis on ensuring interoperability in the IETF protocol development process is lost to some extent. So I applaud trying to raise it where applicable. For the incidents that seem to have kicked up the discussion here in Sidrops, I would also raise the question, well, were some of those incidents observations that actually were very unlikely to show up in an interop test because they depended in some degree on having a fairly large scale of operation, including the fact that race conditions are really something that are hard to force, and finding the problems that may result in race conditions are also very hard. So I very much agree with Randy. Yes, in the start we had interoperability testing for stuff, but it was definitely very low, very small scale. And by the way, we have actually done insider ops, at least one RFC standards track that quite certainly has no way of being interoperability testing, because it is just demanding something on a single system. 8893.
Okay. It looks like the other ADs jumped into the queue too, so maybe Warren and John, and then we'll go back.
Ooh, going to be a knife fight between me and John. So a few things. One, just because a working group is an ops working group, it doesn't mean that there's never going to be anything which requires, something in an implementation or a code or something like that. I mean, as an example, there's a fair bit of work that happens in DNSOP, which is sort of protocol type development. Obviously not massive sets of changes, but some part of operations and maintenance involves some code and protocol updates. If Sidrops does go down the path of, we really want an implementation before something gets published, it should be carefully worded so that there is an escape clause, because obviously there are going to be some set of documents where there is no real implementation, right? Things like best common practices, etc. There isn't going to be an implementation necessarily. And so having an implementation section where, there must be at least 3 people implementing or something isn't really going to be applicable. But I'm suspecting that John has some strong views here.
Maybe less so than you guess. I actually put myself into the queue more as a ex-IDR co-chair than as a routing AD. So first of all, I'm not particularly upset about where work gets done if it's work that needs to be done. And, I guess Warren and I can arm wrestle in private if we come to disagreement, but I'm not too bugged by that. I do agree with what Rudiger said, which is, don't overstate what benefit you're going to get from requiring interoperable implementations. It's not a substitute for running, some kind of a comprehensive test suite. But in my experience in IDR, the main benefit is just in knowing that you've produced a spec that somebody else can read and implement at all. And I can point to multiple specs where that has actually resulted in some significant updates to a spec, sort of post working group last call,
that an implementer came back and said, I don't really understand what I need to do here. And the authors have said, oh my, you're right, and gone and fixed something. So I support doing that. I wish everybody would do it. Everybody who has protocols that they want to be implemented by more than 2 organizations, both of whom helped write the spec, should do it, which I hope includes this working group. And then final comment is, in IDR at least, we don't have rules for exactly what our implementation requirement is. Careful observers might have noticed it is a tradition of requiring an implementation rather than a written rule. So traditions have good and bad points, but they do leave the chairs considerable latitude in deciding, when it makes sense to waive the implementation requirement. So I think that's all the comments I had. Unless anybody has any questions for me, I'll mute again.
Joel?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that motivates this discussion at all is the fact that we're beset by operational challenges, which is, of course, why we're here doing this working group in the ops area to begin with. So, like, if we're making changes because we believe that things will operate better, like, as they stand now, or because they don't work well, that seems relatively close to our charter. And like, with respect to formal or informal, I like, we're ops people, so we tend to be informal, but that doesn't seem to preclude this kind of activity.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to skip through my last 2 slides and Jeff, now, or do you want to wait? Can't hear you, Jeff.
I can wait.
Oh, okay. Perfect. I guess I could have read that in the chat, I'm sure, too. But, okay. Sorry. I think if we go down this route, then we can certainly, the working group chairs can help by making, interim meeting times available to do interop testing if that's, helpful. I don't necessarily know that it is, but the IETF has some tools and methodologies to help this out if we need to. There's some stuff that Job's going to talk about, and he showed in his RSC draft already, using the wiki and a couple of other tooling bits that IETF has and uses to kind of help us along in this process too. I do kind of, I bridle a little bit as a bit of editorial at the, like, well, we're not one of these groups. Okay, great, that's fine. But like, this shit's broke, yo. So, maybe we could fix that, which I think is probably Joel's point. Maybe a little less crass, which is fine. Okay. Oh, shoot. Darn it. Okay. I think we use IDR as the example here. We could use any protocol group or any other group in the IETF that does some requirements or implementation. IDR happens to be what a bunch of folks in the room pay attention to, so that's fine. I think these are bits and pieces that Job actually showed in his RSC presentation. Those seem useful to me, so we can always haggle out the bits and pieces as we go. That's not super important to me. Maybe I'll wait because it looks like somebody else has a. Bernadette, do you want to wait, or with Jeff, or do you want to interject now?
I don't care.
Okay, well, I guess we'll wait then. Okay, as again I said, and this is again, what Yo has already shown. We can use things like the wiki, we can use GitHub. There's a proposal, I think, from Yob to kind of self-fund the test bed itself amongst the implementers. I don't have any particular feeling about that. I'm certainly not able to use a credit card for that one, so we'll figure that problem out. Okay. And again, this is the kind of the work for the chairs. Kayura and Natalie and I would have to sort through making sure that there's a process to go through to have code, and sort of, I think Warren's point about a hard requirement without an exception process is going to be problematic. I agree, that's always the case. It certainly would be good to have an exception process kind of documented for ourselves. But yeah, these don't seem unreasonable to me. And using the process in the data tracker to keep track of when things are done would be great too. And you'll bet a lot of slides for me. Okay, so yes, at the end of the day, we're trying to do what the IETF says it does across the board. Rudiger, do you want to wait or interject now? Same for Warren.
Okay.
I guess I'd like to go. Just saying that if you do have something like the waiting for implementations tag on drafts or something, it is going to require some diligence to make sure that if that's set, it gets followed up on, and people go through it every now and then to make sure that the correct tag is set, and when there are multiple implementations, they get removed, etc. That's all.
Yep, understood. All right, now it's Yob's turn. Do you want me to click Yob and you go, or you want me to jump out and jump?
Yeah, click. Let's see if we can. Okay, so running code. The whole working group is fully supportive of running code, and everybody is thrilled to invest their time and commit themselves to figuring out whether things are implementable and deployable on the global internet. So with that optimism in mind, I want to share some thoughts on how I think we can proceed with ASPA. Because I'm going to be honest, what happened in 2020 and the state of the RPKI ecosystem as it was, say, 2 years ago is not acceptable and is not up for repeat. It is irresponsible to deploy technologies at global scale that happen where some important checks were skipped. Now, whatever we think of the global deployment of origin validation, I do think that we should take a hard look at what is it we can learn from the last 2 years, and how can we, going forward, make projects move along with less friction and more reliable outcomes. And given the, let's call it the awesome power that an ASPA object will have in a few years, if the community decides to deploy that at scale, I think we will do ourselves a big favor by making sure that what we sign off in this working group before our C publication is actually something we are happy with and willing to support the next 10 to 20 years. Because that's, I think some of us in this working group will be attached to the RPKI ecosystem for many years, and that really means that on a personal level, it can be very rewarding to get ahead of the game and prevent problems from happening in the field. Next slide, please. ASPA has a fair amount of moving bits, and those moving pieces belong in different domains, but the totality of it is we need signers. So I can either whip out my hex editor and try and do it manually, or we can ask Ben Madison to use RPKI Mancer, or ask the RERs if they are maybe willing to put up a data instance or some testbed where ASPA objects can be generated and issued for testing purposes. But we need signers. But before you get to signers, you need validators, because how else is the signer going to validate whether what they sign is conformant to the specifications? I am willing to commit some of my time into figuring out if ASPA's object profile and validation mechanisms are doable, whether the internet draft text needs more polishing or clarification, or whether there are omissions. And I do hope that another validator implementer also steps up and takes a look at the ASPA profile definition, like Routinator or Fort or RP-Stir, or whoever feels like taking a look at the profile ASPA profile draft and seeing if they can manage a even proof of concept level is excellent. So for me, this starts in Q4. If others are interested in undertaking that work, it might be worth trying to align the timelines so we can exchange notes in a more streamlined fashion. Then thirdly, we need BHP implementations that take the validated ASPA data and apply that validated ASPA data to BHP updates they receive. And again, we would really benefit from multiple implementations. Here I'm looking at the likes of Cisco and Juniper, Nokia, because they're the big shops. And if they get ASPA wrong, it would be super helpful to catch that in the testbed and not when it's already shipping to customers. And then we as operators, I think, also should take careful care to test, for instance, monitoring. Are the SNP endpoints matching up to what we expect? Can we get data and metrics out of the BHP speakers on how they are behaving? All those quirks that we walked into with origin validation, I think some of that pain should be remembered and then transformed into more robust testing of ASPA. And then finally, the fourth aspect of ASPA is RTR servers and RTR clients. I do believe that RTR is not a prerequisite to use RPKI and be a relying party, but it makes many deployment scenarios much easier. So for those four aspects, we somehow need to produce running code and interoperability matrices to see if our expectations are being met. Next slide, please. To get this project started, and I understand that this is a very big effort. ASPA has been around for some time, but now dragging it to the finish line is going to cost this group time and energy. But the start is relatively simple. First, we go to IANA to get the OIDs. Just like with RRC, we can get those OIDs without things being published as RRC, but it does help with coordinating the testbed. Then after we get the code points, we should try to work to set up a trust anchor and a testbed under the trust anchor where ASPA objects can be published. I would caution against immediately jumping to publishing ASPA objects in the global production RPKI, but that also would be an option. But I think a testbed scenario would be easier. So if there's a group or an institution or an organization willing to take on the operation of the root in the testbed, that would be very welcome. After ASPA objects have been published somewhere, validators can pick those up, pass them along to BGP speakers, hopefully via RTR or via other means. And through the use of GRE tunnels, we can connect the different BGP speakers to each other and verify whether ASPA aware or ASPA not aware ISPs and routing decisions are working as we expect them to work. So here we can use the internet as an overlay network to quite cheaply interconnect different BGP implementations and different configuration deployment scenarios to see if everybody is on the same page, how exactly the validation works. So I think getting started is not the hardest part. It all starts with getting code points and going from there. Next slide, please. The cost of this project is predominantly in our people hours. It's not machinery, it's not hosting, it's not the IANA allocations, it's not the mailing list, because both IETF and Jared would be happy to host the mailing list to coordinate the testbed. The trust anchor can operate on a small VM. The tunnel server is not there to pass traffic, just to pass BGP updates, so that too can use the smallest of the smallest server. And I'm happy to help coordinate this and point people, do things like IP address registration and tunnel registration. The money is not the issue. It's really, do the working group participants believe that ASPA is worth investigating to the extent to actually try setting up ASPA validation on a fake internet, and then to see if the results are what we want them to be, or if there are, who knows, shortfalls in the algorithm. And the assumption here is that for instance, if I were to implement a BGP aspect of ASPA, I will hook up my BGP daemon myself to an internet connection I myself pay towards the tunnel server, and from there things can flow to other participants who also stood up their BGP speakers on GRE tunnels or not. So there is no big rack with everything ASPA and everybody ships a giant router to the central location. The model I'm advocating is that we try and do everything virtual and just use tunnels over the real internet to connect everything together. And this allows everybody to manage their own cost. Next slide, please. So what we need to talk about here is who is going to do what. Do people see value in setting up an ASPA testbed to this extent and to strive to get at least 2 implementations of all 4 aspects, or do people have different feelings? This is where I think the input from the group is much appreciated. And I think with that, we'll just start with the microphone queue. Rudiger, I think you were first.
Okay. I have something specific for what you presented, and I'll move back to kind of the principles we were discussing before. One simple suggestion from me for preparing operational type of tests like test beds and so on would be we should ask the RIRs, or one of them, or whatever, to simply support straight delegation of just AS resources of a member to a member CA, and allow decoupling the member CAs for the address space and the ASs. The operation for the address space is something stable and we do not want to mess around. The AS part is not yet populated and will be the crucial playing field for ASPA and other things maybe. And
wait, Rudiger, what do you mean with the AS field is not populated?
Well, we have the delegation of ASs maybe but actually there are no objects really hanging off related to the ASs in the CAs so far.
I have good news for you. RSC is probably the first where the AS identifier is used in the hierarchical sense. So I agree with your statement, but right now today AS identifiers are usable under all TALs.
Yes, but kind of with the idea of before throwing something into real operations, going a little bit more for something that allows test-beddy things. That would not really hurt RSC, and allowing in particular for the elaborate testbed ideas you have presented for ASPA to have that optionally decoupled from the address space stuff, I think would be helpful. So. Simple idea and just something to be discussed with RIRs. Kind of one of the reasons there is getting in the test environment actual operators to deal with their implementation of a CA, experimental CA, obviously is less problematic than enforcing additional functionality for testing on the RIR side. So, but let me jump off that specific topic and just say I very much appreciate your elaborate work on figuring out work items for an ASPA test bed or test operation. And then let me jump back to the general stuff that we had before. We had been discussing before interoperational testing. And what we are seeing here is actually something far beyond that. It is test bedding. And one should clearly understand the differences and mark whether one is working on one or the other. Yes, to a certain degree, they may overlap, but they are very different things. And that brings me to a question for the general interoperability requirements, where I wonder whether we should actually try to get consensus about what the primary goal of the exercise is. I remember old times when one had to explain to ISO people what the IETF was doing, and for the interoperability requirements, there was, I think, the official IETF view that said, yes, the interoperability test is there as a quality assurance process for the quality of the specifications, making sure that a few different people actually interpret the text in a conforming manner. I think quite clearly we would not want to let that go. However, back in the old times, there were also at least two other interpretations that were not that were not really the true belief. And those interpretations were, as I remember, oh, this is a way to ensure that reference implementations are available for free, which certainly was not true. In many cases, yes, it happened, but it certainly wasn't the goal or the primary goal. And, the third one.
Do you mind if
Yeah.
I do that? I did not clarify it earlier in the presentation, but when I talk about running code, I am not talking about open source code. The license of software has nothing to do with whether running code exists or not. So, for instance, in the olden days, I would sit next to Jakob Heitz and we would run a cable from laptop to laptop to test large communities, even though we didn't have access to each other's source code. So,
absolutely sure. This free reference implementation was kind of a public illusion, and I have trouble to remember the third version, but I wonder whether we actually when we set up in more or less formal ways a requirement, whether the primary goal of the exercise actually should be spelled out. I think it would make a lot of sense. And one may need to actually on the side understand that yes, test bedding is for assuring operational quality a requirement, but that actually goes beyond. So I
also help publish better. So how can we know whether they if they poorly published HTA documents, we need to be able to find out that
kind of that's about covered by the original quality assurance.
Okay,
so
just
I step off the soapbox.
Yeah, a quick time check, and then everyone else can chat. But we have 8 minutes. We have one slide deck that's very short, hopefully. But go, keep it short.
Yep, Kay, speaking both in a capacity of working group chair as well as a working group member. Chris and I have discussed this. The example here is pretty narrowed down, but one difference I see between IDR and Sidrops is the maturity at which we accept the documents as working group documents. In IDR, my personal experience has been is that the draft has gone through a considerable amount of discussions on mailing list where it has matured to the point where implementers can take a stab at it, which is somewhat reversed in Sidrops, where we tend to accept the draft first, have lots of conversations, and then progress it to the last call. This has, believe it or not, some kind of a direct implications on the cost to design the software, in sense that if software keeps on churning, you're going to see the issues that you have been seeing as well. So I think one thing for the working group members to think about is if this general approach is accepted as an implementation is needed, I think we should tune the requirements of what needs to be accepted as a working group document moving forward, in sense that we should have folks have more discussions a priori before issuing a working group call. Like I said, Chris and I have talked about this, but something for working group members to think through.
Ben?
Okay, a few things. I think that the application of kind of a rule requiring implementations is going to vary so widely on a document by document basis that it makes almost no sense to try and define that ahead of time. I think that's going to need to be a call for the chairs to make on a case by case basis. I think from my perspective, I think that the starting off point simply needs to be that where there's a document that is going to require source code to change in implementations, in some layer of the stack, that work happens and results in something that is at least testable, either in the field or in the lab, before it gets published rather than afterwards, so that we're not in this kind of endless cycle of having to revise already published RFCs that have specs in them. And I think the other point to make, and I think this is actually quite well illustrated by what Job's been talking about, is there are two categories of things that we need to worry about from a interop and correctness perspective in terms of the work we do. There's the, does my signer create a DER stream that your RP can read is one category, and that's kind of the straight up and down interop stuff. But this ASPA testbed is in a slightly different category. It's got some element of that. But actually, more importantly, here what we're talking about is does ASPA, when correctly implemented, do what we want it to do to the default free zone? And that goes way beyond interoperability testing, and that's what kind of we're driving at here. Just very briefly, because I know we're running out of time, I think that largely I agree with what you're suggesting here. I think that we do ourselves a disservice if we try and do this on a completely sandboxed, separate interconnection topology using tunnels. I think that we want the benefit of the complexity and messiness of the real default free zone, because that's where the interesting corner cases are going to live. So I think we want to be, probably running separate CAs and separate RPs and separate publication servers, but validating real routes. Cheers.
Jeff?
Yeah, I agree, Ben, that in this testbed, I would want to mimic the particular shape of the default free zone and make sure that we can either just take the real data and pump it through or concat something. But yes, that is indeed the goal. Does this do for the default free zone what we want it to do? Next question.
Thanks, Chris. Let me jump in. Time is of the essence, and I did want to make this point. This is nothing to do with ASPA in the first instance. This is an IETF-wide problem, and it's a big problem. The IETF, when it talked about running code and rough consensus, actually was talking about the quality of the specification, not the viability of its deployment. What it was talking about was producing standard specifications that were implementable as they stood. And the references at the time to OSI that produced non-interoperable implementations was directly the topic. And so what the IETF was trying to do was to create this issue that this spec is good enough for independent implementations, independent to interoperate as intended. But this discussion seems to be confusing that, because what I hear is this spec works at scale, God knows how, it makes this better, God knows why, and you should build it because it's good. And that's a complete mischaracterization of the role of any standards group. And so to insist that specifications be good enough for independent implementations is a worthy effort for a standards group and a protocol body. In operations, it's a little bit weirder, but I actually think the same thing works. If you are pushing out what you call a specification, then interoperation is a good idea. But that next test around market acceptance and viability at scale, we're not talking about garages anymore. We're talking about enormous cost to actually implement almost anything in this internet at scale. And any kind of test of that is going to be difficult. And indeed, you kind of wonder if it's the IETF's business in any case. We are not here to tell people how to spend their money. We're not. That's a market job, and the market does that just fine or badly, however you think of it, but it's not the IETF's job. Now, I don't think we're ever going to solve this in Sidrops, and I'm not going to solve it in the few remaining seconds I've got. There are ADs here. I actually think this is an IETF plenary, and it should come around from time to time. What does rough consensus and running code actually mean? Because I don't think individual working groups can head off into the fields and create their own sort of somewhat bizarre specific rules and expect the outcomes as the IETF to be cohesive and useful for the industry. So I would actually plead to Sidrops, please, can we just punt this back at the IESG and say, IESG, we're having a bit of problem here, and we actually think an IETF-wide discussion orchestrated by the IESG might help us all to get a little bit more focus on what's achievable and what we mean by interoperation and interable, and what the market means by taking it up. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Alexander?
Can I quickly respond?
Sure.
When I spoke about viable, I did not mean market acceptance. Whether people want to use ASPA or not, or whether they pick vendors that support it or not, that's none of my business. What I meant with viable is that we as working group can see a demonstration that it works at all. And I think before we can publish a document saying it is possible for independent implementers to take this text, read it, and then construct software that can interrupt with the rest, there has to be some software to interrupt with. So we're right now at the first steps to get some proof of concepts going. And I'm not asking for commercial quality. Any quality is fine. I mean, if multiple people read the specs and got it running and we have proof that it was running and interrupting, then we're good, right? Then that's all I look to achieve. But yes, this is an IETF-wide discussion that has been going on for 50 years. Alex, your turn.
Thanks. I'll try to be short. So first of all, thank you for the slides. As a co-author of the ASP, I really enjoyed them, and it's great feeling that it's starting moving into the right direction. Ben also raised a question as what will be the effect of the ASPA in the real internet, in the fault-free zone. Here, the company that I'm working for may try to share its own experience, because I believe that we are the only company at the moment that not only possesses ASPA-like running code, but also ASPA-like operational experience, because we also have both monitoring and filtering on top of ASPA-like, because there are no real ASPA records. And on top of this list of action items, I'll try to also put some of our implementations to the open source, so more ISPs will be able to evaluate the ASPA behavior before they will start using this technology, before even asking their vendor to implement it. I think it can be also useful.
Okay, so then I want to conclude. Dear chairs, ASPA would like some code points.
The answer to that is typically, please put that on the mailing list to us so we don't forget.
Will do.
Okay, we're 3 minutes over. If people want to stay, the count of people in the room is 42. I'll start presenting the other presentation. It is super quick and short. We can decide as we go. Okay. I think really quickly that I didn't pay the best attention to this at the end of its run, but it looks like we came to a basic conclusion that this seems good enough to move forward? Oops, Alexander, do you still have a question? No, oh, sorry. For those people that haven't read it, there's a new version as of 2 days ago, I think, for the 6486 biz that includes some changes around the required bits and pieces for handling certificates, I believe. I forget the specifics, but it's in the diff, you can see. Does this need any more work? It would be good if people could read it in the next week or two, have some comments. If there's no comments, then the authors could just request a last call and we can move it forward if that's good enough. If there's going to need any more work, I believe we need to find a new editor/author. So it would be good if there was somebody to volunteer for that as well. I think that's it. I don't have any more slides. I just wanted to say thanks to the folks who did the writing and thinking work, both the editors, authors, and the people who from the list who, or the group who spoke up and took some bullets and or shot some bullets. That's the person. Anyway, thanks very much for the work on that. I think it was good for the group and for the spec to kind of move things forward. I don't have anything else. If there's any questions, we can hang out for another probably 5 minutes before we get kicked out of the room. Oliver.
Can you hear me good?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Perfect.
wonderful. I just wanted to add to Alexander that we actually, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, published the current implementation draft of the ASPA as well. I put the link in the chat. If someone is interested in playing with this, it's our BGP SRX implementation that we added that. And once the new draft comes out with the updated algorithm, then we will publish this one as well. Just as info.
Terrific, thanks. Okay, I think unless someone's gonna make some comments, I think we're all done. I'll ask on the list officially about 6486 biz and see where that wants to go. And see everybody in 3-ish months or 4 months, whatever it is. All right, thanks. Bye. Care.
I'm good. Thank you.
Cool.